She doesn't want to live with you. My husband's attorney said it the way you'd read a weather report, flat and rehearsed, and across the room, my 7-year-old daughter pressed herself into the back of my mother-in-law's cardigan and would not look at me. My husband Grant slid a psychological evaluation across the table, like a man laying down a winning hand. According to that piece of paper, the years I'd spent in the Army had turned me into a woman who was volatile, dangerous, unfit to raise my own child. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my bag and set my daughter's old teddy bear on the table in front of the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "before you decide who's telling the truth in this room, I'd like you to hear what my daughter already recorded." When the audio started to play, the smile fell off my husband's face, like something had cut the string holding it up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. None of this makes sense unless you understand who my daughter is and who I was before a courtroom tried to tell me I was someone else. So, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Captain Erin Doyle. I'm 43 years old, a nurse by training and by calling, and for the last 19 years, I've worn the uniform of the United States Army as a medical officer. I've held soldiers together with my bare hands while helicopters screamed overhead and the sand came in sideways. I've written letters to mothers I never met, telling them their sons were not alone at the end. I've done the hardest work in the world, and I've done it without flinching. I need you to hold on to that, because the man I married spent 6 weeks trying to convince a judge that a woman who kept dying men calm was too angry to be trusted with a little girl. My daughter's name is Maisie. She was born with profound hearing loss in both ears, and from the time she was 2, she'd been learning to live in 2 worlds at once, one made of sound, one made of hands. She wore hearing aids that gave her a soft underwater version of the world, and she signed with a speed and a joy that made strangers stop on the sidewalk to watch her. She was not a child to be pitied. She was a child who noticed everything. She could tell you the mood of a room before anyone said a word, because she'd spent her whole life reading faces instead of voices. That's the part they all forgot, every one of them. 6 months before that courtroom, I'd left for an advanced trauma course at Fort Sam Houston. 6 months is a long time when your daughter is 7, and I knew exactly how long it was. I didn't leave carelessly. I planned for everything. It's the habit that keeps people alive. I set up video calls every single night at 7 o'clock. I mailed Maisie a card every week, a real card she could hold. I recorded myself signing bedtime stories, dozens of them, so Grant could play them on the nights I couldn't be there in person. I built a whole scaffolding of love to hold up the space where I couldn't stand. For the first month the calls came through, Maisie would press her face too close to the camera, her nose almost touching the lens, and sign, "I miss you," with both hands. And I'd sign it back, and we'd both cry a little, and it was okay. It was the ordinary ache of a family stretched thin across a country. I could live with ordinary ache. I'd lived with worse. Then the calls began to fall apart. "She's asleep," Grant would text at 6:58, 2 minutes before our call. "She had a rough day," another night. "She doesn't feel like talking," tonight said a third. My mother-in-law, Diane, had moved into our house while I was gone. "To help," she said. And somehow, every time I asked to see my daughter's face, there was a fresh, reasonable-sounding reason. The answer was no. Homework, a headache, a tantrum, a bath that ran long. Each excuse on its own meant nothing. It was only later, laying them side by side like cards, that I saw the pattern in them. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things that year that turned out to be lies I'd handed to myself, so I wouldn't have to see the truth yet. When I flew home in October, I expected my daughter to run to me at the airport the way she always had. Arms up, hands, already spelling my name in the air before she reached me. Instead, she stood behind Grant's leg and looked at the floor of the terminal like it held something more interesting than her mother. I knelt down on the cold tile. I signed slow and open, "Hi, my love. I missed you so much." She glanced up, not at me, past me, toward Grant, and only after he gave her some small nod I wasn't meant to catch did she lift one hand and sign a flat, careful "hi," the way you'd greet a teacher you didn't like. I didn't understand it yet, but something cold moved through me on that airport floor, the same instinct that used to tell me a patient was crashing a full minute before the monitor started to scream. Something is wrong. Something is very wrong, and it is in my own house. The divorce papers were waiting on the kitchen counter when we got home, sitting under a bowl of fruit like they'd been there for weeks. Grant wanted full custody. The petition said my military service had left me with unmanaged anger and emotional instability. It said I had abandoned the marital home for extended periods. It said our daughter was fearful in my presence. And attached to it, stapled and official, was a psychological evaluation signed by a doctor. Paul Reyes, a private clinician I had never met, never spoken to, never sat across from in my life, who had nonetheless reached a firm conclusion about the state of my mind. I read the whole thing, standing up in my own kitchen, still in my travel clothes, my boots still on, and my hands were steady. That's the thing nobody expects about people like me. When the worst thing finally arrives, sometimes you don't fall apart. Sometimes you go very, very calm, because calm is the only tool that's ever worked, and your body reaches for it without asking. "You brought a stranger into our lives to diagnose me," I said quietly. Grant leaned against the doorframe, with his arms crossed comfortable, like a man who'd already read the last page of the book. "I brought in a professional. There's a difference." Diane appeared behind him, pearls at her throat, wearing that church lady smile she used like a paring knife, small, neat, and always aimed at something soft. "Erin, dear, nobody's saying you're a bad person," she said. And the gentleness of it was the cruelest thing in the room. "We're only saying Maisie needs stability. She needs to feel safe in her own home." "She's my daughter. She's afraid of you," Diane said so kindly, so sadly. "We have it on video. We didn't want it to come to this." We really didn't. They did have it on video. I saw the clips 2 weeks later when Naomi received them in Discovery, and I watched them alone at my kitchen table at midnight, with the volume turned all the way up, and they broke something in me, and then slowly put something else in its place. In the first clip, Maisie sat on our living room couch, small against the cushions. A voice off camera Grant's asked, "How do you feel when Mommy's home?" And my daughter, my bright, watchful girl, said in her careful spoken voice, the one she worked so hard on, "Mommy makes me scared." In the second clip, "Mommy's never home." In the third, "I don't want to live with Mommy." I watched them 4 times. The first 3 times, I only heard the words, and the words were a knife going in slow. But on the 4th time, I stopped listening like a mother and started watching like a nurse. Because words lie, bodies don't. I've read 1,000 bodies in the worst moments of their lives, and I know when the outside and the inside don't match. Every single time before she answered, Maisie's eyes flicked to the same place, up and to the right, just outside the frame. Someone was standing there. Someone she was checking with the way she used to check with me before she jumped into a pool. And the words themselves were wrong. Not wrong for a frightened child, wrong for a 7-year-old at all. "Mommy makes me scared" is not the way a 7-year-old talks. It's the way an adult writes a line for a 7-year-old to memorize. I called my attorney at 12:40 in the morning. Her name was Naomi Cross. Captain Cross, retired, and she ran a small practice out of a strip mall office that took on military families the big downtown firms wouldn't return calls from. She'd done 20 years as a JAG officer before she hung out her own shingle, and she had the particular unshakable patience of a woman who has watched powerful people lie under oath and then watch them lose. They coached her, I said the moment she picked up. Naomi, they coached her. Watch her eyes when she answers. She's looking at somebody. I believe you, Naomi said, and I heard her already sitting up in the dark, already reaching for a pen. But you need to understand something, and I'm going to be straight with you, because that's the only way I know how to do this. I believe you isn't evidence. A judge is going to sit in that courtroom and watch 3 videos of a little girl saying she's frightened of her mother. Your word against that is not going to be enough. We need to show him something he cannot argue with. Something that doesn't come from you. A pause. Erin, does Maisie have any way to talk to you that Grant and Diane don't control? I thought about it for a long time, sitting in the blue light of my laptop. And then I remembered the bear. Maisie's speech-language therapist, a gentle, sharp-eyed woman named Priya Anand, who'd worked with her twice a week for 2 years, had given Maisie a teddy bear the previous spring. It wasn't an ordinary toy. Sewn into the seam of its back was a small recording device, a therapy tool. You press one paw, it records. You press the other, it plays back. Maisie used it to practice her speech, to record herself saying her hardest sounds, and then listen to whether they'd come out the way she meant them to. She loved that bear the way some kids love a blanket. She carried it everywhere. She'd taken it, I realized, with a slow chill, into every single room of that house, every single day, for the whole 6 months I was gone. The next time I was allowed to see her, one supervised hour at a family visitation center with Diane sitting in the corner, pretending to read a magazine she never turned a page of, Maisie climbed into my lap and did something strange. She hugged the bear tight against my chest between our 2 bodies in the one small space where Diane's eyes couldn't reach her hands. And low, close hidden, she signed a single sentence. The bear knows what Grandma says. I kept my face perfectly still. I've spent 19 years learning to keep my face still while everything inside me came apart. I signed back tiny and slow tucked against her. Can Mommy hold the bear for a while? She nodded against my collarbone. And when the hour ended and Diane rose to collect her, Maisie handed me the bear like it was nothing like a child who'd simply forgotten her toy, and walked out of the door, holding her father's hand without looking back. I did not press that paw until I was locked in my car in the parking garage with the engine off. And when I did, when I heard what was on it, I put my forehead against the steering wheel and I wept. Not from grief this time, from something closer to rage. And underneath the rage, a flood of relief so strong it left me shaking. The bear had been recording in fragments for months whenever a small hand pressed its paw. Maisie practicing her words in a sunlit room. Cartoons murmuring in the background. Her own small laugh. And threaded all through it, the thing none of them ever knew was there, because who checks a child's teddy bear? My mother-in-law's voice. Say it again. Mommy makes me scared. Say it clear this time, or we'll do it over and over until you get it right. Mommy's never home. Good girl. Now again, for the camera tomorrow. Just like that. You want the puppy, don't you? Then you have to tell the man exactly what we practiced. If you cry, no puppy. If you say the wrong thing, no puppy, and Grandma will be so sad. You don't want to make Grandma sad, do you? And Grant's voice was on it too, quieter further from the microphone. But there, undeniable. Just get through the evaluation, Mise. Say what Grandma taught you, and this'll all be over. Then everything goes back to normal, I promise. I brought it to Naomi's office the next morning before it opened, and I made her listen to the whole thing without stopping. When it finished, she took off her glasses and pressed her fingers against her closed eyes for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, now we have something." But then she said the thing that mattered most, the thing that kept me from marching into the courthouse that afternoon and torching everything down. "We can't just play this and win, Erin. If we ambush them, Grant's lawyer will claim we fabricated it. He'll say we coached her ourselves, that we spliced it, that a child can't consent to being recorded, that it's a stolen therapy device and inadmissible. If we're careless, the most important evidence in this case gets thrown out and we lose the war to win one dramatic afternoon. So, we're not going to be careless. We're going to build this so clean that no one can touch it. And we're going to give Maisie a way to tell her own truth to a person Grant cannot reach, cannot see, and cannot coach." So that's what we did. We didn't ambush anyone. We built it one piece at a time, the way you build a case that actually holds. First, Naomi subpoenaed Dr. Paul Reyes, the man who'd signed the evaluation that called me unstable. And this is where the stunt layer of the whole thing came apart in our hands. Under questioning in his deposition, Reyes admitted he had never met me. Not once. He'd never observed me with Maisie, never interviewed me, never so much as spoken to me on the phone. His professional evaluation of my mental state was built entirely from interviews that Grant and Diane had provided to him, their words dressed up in his credentials. And when Naomi pulled his business records, which she was fully entitled to do, she found something that made her go very quiet. Dr. Reyes and Diane were not strangers. Diane held a financial interest in the wellness center where Reyes ran his practice. She was in a small but real way his business partner. She had paid a man with a title to write down exactly what she needed the court to believe about me. Reyes also admitted sweating through his collar in that little conference room, that in the 3 sessions he'd conducted with Maisie, a family member had been in the room every single time. He had never once spoken to my daughter alone. Every answer she gave him about her mother, she gave with Diane sitting 8 feet away watching. So it would be fair to say, Naomi said in that mild, terrible voice of hers, that you assessed a little girl's fear of her mother while the very person coaching that fear sat in the room the entire time. Reyes didn't answer. He looked at his hands. He didn't have to say a word. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. On paper, I was losing. I still lived in a rented room across town because Grant had the house. I saw my daughter 1 supervised hour at a time, always with Diane in the corner, and I had to hand her back at the end of every visit and drive away while she watched me go through the glass. On the outside, I was the unstable mother the paperwork said I was. On the inside, I was building the quietest, most careful case of my life, and I could not tell a soul. I learned to use those supervised hours differently. I stopped trying to squeeze 6 months of missed love into 60 minutes because that only frightened her. Instead, I got small and slow and steady. We colored. We signed silly jokes. And every so often, tucked against my body, where Diane couldn't see Maisie, would tell me one more thing, that Grandma had thrown away the bedtime story videos I'd recorded, that she wasn't allowed to say she missed me, that she'd been practicing the words at the kitchen table before dinner over and over until Grandma said they sounded real. Each thing she told me went straight to Naomi, and Naomi wrote it all down, dated and timed, and filed it away. Not to spring in the courtroom, Naomi never wanted a single ambush. She wanted a mountain so large that when the day came, No one could pretend it was a molehill. I also did something I'm not proud of and don't regret. I started watching Diane. Not obsessively, I didn't have the time, but I noticed. I noticed that Maisie went rigid every time Diane's hand landed on her shoulder. I noticed that she asked to use the bathroom whenever Diane raised her voice, even a little. I noticed that my daughter, who used to fill a room, had learned to make herself small and soundless. A child who's been made afraid moves through the world differently, and I'd spent a career learning to read exactly that. It wasn't me she flinched from. I have the footage now to prove it, but I knew it long before any judge did. Then came Priya, the therapist. She testified that the bear was a genuine documented therapeutic device, that she had given it to Maisie herself, that its purpose, recording and playing back the child's own speech, was written into Maisie's clinical file 2 years earlier. A recording made by the child on her own therapy tool in her own home was not surveillance. It was precisely the thing the device existed to create. It was a little girl's voice, captured by the object built to capture it. And then, on the day that mattered, we let Grant go first. The morning of that hearing, I put on my dress uniform. Not to perform, and not because Naomi told me to, she hadn't. I put it on because it reminded me who I was. Before Grant and Diane spent 6 months trying to convince a court I was someone dangerous. 19 years were in that uniform. Every soldier I'd ever kept breathing was in it. I stood in front of the motel mirror and squared the jacket and looked at the woman looking back, and I said out loud to no one, "You did nothing wrong. You are her mother. Go get your daughter." Then I drove to the courthouse with my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in weeks. That's the part I most want you to understand about how a thing like this is won. You don't fight the loudest person in the room with more noise. You go quiet. You let them fill the whole room with everything they've got. You let them feel right up until the last possible second like they've already won. Grant testified for the better part of an hour. He told Judge Hollis that I was gone all the time, that I loved the Army more than my family, that Maisie flinched when I came through the door, that he had agonized over this decision and only wanted to protect his little girl. Diane dabbed her eyes in the gallery behind him. The 3 videos played on the courtroom screen, and my daughter's small recorded voice said she was scared of me 3 separate times, and I made myself watch Grant's face the entire time, not the screen, his face. And I saw it there, plain as anything satisfaction. He believed a piece of paper in a coach child had beaten a woman who had spent 19 years refusing to leave a single soul behind. When our turn came, Naomi called no experts. She didn't reach for the bear. She simply stood, looked at Judge Hollis, and asked whether the court would permit Maisie to speak with an independent, court-appointed sign language interpreter, a professional chosen by the court, unknown to either parent, in a separate room, on the record, with both parents required to remain silent and out of the child's sight. Judge Hollis was a gray, careful man who had watched a great many people lie in his courtroom over the years, and I think he had already begun to feel the shape of something wrong. He said yes. They brought Maisie in. Not to me, I stayed exactly where I was, but to a neutral interpreter. A woman, my daughter, had never met in a quiet room with a camera and a court reporter, while Grant and Diane were made to sit in the gallery in full view of the bailiff, unable to catch her eye, unable to nod, unable to remind her of a single word. And for the first time in 6 months, my little girl got to answer a question with absolutely no one standing just outside the frame. The interpreter signed, "Are you afraid of your mother?" Maisie signed back, and the interpreter spoke it aloud evenly for the record, no, I'm not afraid of Mommy. I'm afraid of Grandma. Grandma said if I don't say the words, she'll leave and never come back, and I won't get to keep any of my things, and the puppy will go away, and Daddy will be sad forever, and it'll be my fault. So I said the words, but they aren't true. I want to live with Mommy. I just didn't know how to tell anybody without Grandma hearing me. The courtroom was silent enough that I could hear the clock on the wall. And then Naomi set the teddy bear on the table in front of the bench and asked the court to hear what my daughter had recorded months ago in her own home on the toy her therapist had given her with her own 2 hands. Judge Hollis nodded once. The paw was pressed. And Diane's voice filled that courtroom. Say it again. You want the puppy, don't you? If you say the wrong thing, no puppy, and Grandma will be so sad. Then Grant's voice, quieter, unmistakable. Say what Grandma taught you, and it'll all be over. I watched the smile leave my husband's face. I watched my mother-in-law's hand rise slowly to the pearls at her throat and stay there. And I watched Judge Hollis take off his glasses, fold them, set them on the bench, and look at the 2 of them for a long, long moment with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was colder and quieter than anger. It was the look of a man who had just fully understood what had been done to a child in his own courtroom and who had the power to do something about it. He ruled from the bench. He didn't wait for another session. He didn't need to. I was granted primary physical and legal custody of Maisie. Grant was granted supervised visitation, only conditional, on completing a family reunification program in a course of individual counseling. The court referred the matter of the coach testimony to the state for investigation into the tampering with a child witness. Diane was barred from any unsupervised contact with Maisie until that investigation concluded. Dr. Reyes's evaluation was struck from the record in its entirety with a formal note that his conduct would be reported to the state licensing board, and the man who'd sold his credentials to a woman with pearls in a plan spent the following year answering for it. I did not ask the court to erase Grant from my daughter's life, and people always ask me why. I'll tell you the truth. He is her father. Whatever he let himself become in that house under his mother's hand, he was also the man who taught Maisie to ride a bike in our driveway and who cried the first time he held her. A child who loses a parent to bitterness carries that missing weight for the rest of her life, and I would not lay that on my daughter, just to satisfy something wounded in me. But I asked for guardrails, and I got every one of them, and I will use them without apology for as long as she needs me to. Diane. I have not spoken to since that day, and I don't intend to. Some bridges you do not rebuild. You simply make certain that no one you love ever has to cross them again. Here is what I learned, and it's the only thing I really came here to tell you. For 6 months, the people who were supposed to love my daughter treated her silence as proof that she didn't understand what was happening around her. They thought that because she couldn't always hear them, she couldn't see them. They looked at a quiet child and decided she was a blank page they could write on. They were wrong about her, the way people are always wrong about the quiet ones. She saw all of it. She understood every ugly thing that happened in that house, and she found the only way a coached, frightened 7-year-old child could to leave a record of the truth, a teddy bear pressed against her mother's chest so no one could see her small hands moving, and one whispered sentence. The bear knows what Grandma says. A child who goes quiet is not a child who has stopped knowing the truth. Sometimes she is the only person left in the room, still holding it, waiting for someone to get down low enough to hear. So if you ever find yourself doubting a child because they've gone silent, because they won't meet your eyes, because their words come out too neat, because someone louder has already told you what to think. I hope you'll remember Maisie. Get down to their level. Give them a way to tell you the truth that no one else can hear. And then when they finally hand it to you, believe them. Maisie is 9 now. She has a puppy one. I bought her myself. No strings attached, no conditions, just because she wanted one and because I could. She's fast at soccer and slow at bedtime, and she still notices the mood of a room before anyone says a word. And every single night at 7 o'clock, whether I'm home on the couch beside her or halfway around the world in a place I can't name, we sign each other the same 3 things before she goes to sleep. I miss you. I love you. I'm here. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest voice in the room is very often the one telling the truth. And if you'd like to hear more stories about Resilience Family and the strength of ordinary people who refuse to be written over, I'd be honored if you subscribed and stayed with me a while longer. The end.